All right. Um, so Southern Organic Pest Management, Plant Healthcare for Organic Pests. So I'm Audrey Kolde. I'm going to be talking today, but as always, I really like to include y'all as much as you have. What pests are you really struggling with right now, and where, like, where are your really needs? Because it goes down. Pest, of course, is weeds and fungus and disease, as well as insects. Just making, I think this room seems like a knowledgeable room. So I always like to throw that in there. Sometimes I'm presenting to gardeners and stuff. But a quick agenda is us getting to know each other and how I come into this space, and why our pest pressure, as we were discussing, is getting worse throughout our changing world, and why farmers are facing unprecedented issues. And then just the concepts of IPM, and what we're practicing in order to better be able to, get these insects and diseases out of our yards and out of our farms. So I, again, am located here in Louisiana. I have farmed in West Virginia, Alabama, and Louisiana. And along with that, knowing that I really came to farming in a lot of ways because of my desire for community and my love of community, which is rooted oftentimes in my faith background. I really love science, and I really loved taking care of the local food community and feeding the people. And whenever those two things combine, they combine into agriculture and food system work. I've only worked for production farms that are nonprofits as well. So, I really like to make it difficult on myself, because I like to keep things mission driven in my agriculture, which I think a lot of sustainable agriculture folks do, is they are growing food for the community for a reason. And even if it's not a nonprofit, they see the hunger and the need in their community. And the reason sustainable agriculture is important to me is, it goes right back to that, is the fact that in sustainable agriculture, you're putting that nature and community and the regeneration of both at the forefront. Um, and especially whenever we're in the South, those two things are so important. I feel like that we're talking about getting, regenerating our communities after our long history of treating people badly, and, after pouring chemicals into our bayous, trying to regenerate that is such a core part of agriculture. Now I'm a farmer here in Alexandria, Cicada Market Garden, and we grow a lot of shelf-stable produce, as well as getting to work for ATTRA. So my job title is the National Center for at the National Center for Appropriate Technology is a Sustainable Ag Specialist, but NCAT stands for the National Center for Appropriate Technology. The appropriate technology is like a word that can kind of get confusing, but from my understanding, the first person to use that concept of small scale, of really meaningful use of technology, because you're using a lot more person hours and a lot more intention in your technology, was Gandhi. And you can think about his along with his march to the salt mines march. He was weaving his own clothes the entire way, and he was growing his own cotton. So that's really the intention behind our organization, was that we were started during the energy crisis to help combat, all those issues that were happening then, with low income folks, and then eventually moving into agriculture as the same concept of a place where appropriate technology can really thrive and get its use from. So whenever we're talking about pest pressure and climate change, some of the things that we can all agree on is the fact that um, we can see the temperatures increasing and our elevated CO2 concentrations changing and our precipitation changing. So how does that affect our pest pressures at the end of the day? The temperature increases means, we get cucumber beetles earlier, even though our frost state hasn't changed. Or, their cycles are changing. So whenever we expect these insects to be, they're not always there whenever we're expecting them. With our CO2 levels changing as well, that insects have this interesting element of like needing to balance their carbon and nitrogen levels. And in that balance, the CO2 levels throwing them out of whack means that they're increasing the amount of nitrogen they got to eat, which means they're increasing the amount of leaves they're eating every single day. And so, you're like, oh, shoot, now I got more pest pressure. I got more insects eating my food. And then changes in precipitation, oftentimes effects are like fungus in our bacteria and stuff like that. We're like, oh, we got long periods of drought. So that means that there's no, like, our plants are all sickly and weak. And then we get like a bunch of rain and we're like, and all the fungus is like, yay, and the plants are weak from the drought. And, the classic cycle of our summers at the moment is just really disrupting what we know and expect from our pest issues. And so that really just brings about the final thought of being like, we are in a world of changing climates. And I've heard lots of farmers who've been farming for their entire lives say it's getting difficult again. Financially, it is getting difficult to be able to make ends meet every single week and every single year throughout the crops whenever they thought they had it down. And now things change just whenever they had it down again. Our world changes. So here we are, whether or not we know our enemy. So there's lots of ways you can try and figure out and identify and scout. That's one of the words in farming we use a lot is scouting your insects. You can use sticky traps, or you can even go as simple as some Dawn water in a colorful little plastic bowl. And then I'm just gonna call on y'all for a second to hear what insects you're scouting right now that have turned into this little child meme where which insects you're struggling with so much that you just want to cry about it. Every summer, me and those leaf-footed squash bugs, I'm just like, want to cry about all those freaking insects. What insects are driving y'all mad right now? See if I can see the chat. Oh, y'all, I think I'm not as savvy as I thought I was. Like, I'm struggling to find my chat. There it is. Okay. Leaf-footed bugs, grasshoppers and squash beetles, vine bars. Because once you get them, pickle worms. Ooh, pickle worms. Curly top virus hits our tomatoes. Grasshoppers, man. For grasshopper folks, they're attacking your vegetables or they're a like more monocrop. Harlequin. Oh, veggies and flowers. Nice. And your pole beans. Yeah. See, we all got those insects that we're trying to forget about at night. Whenever you fall asleep and you wake up in the morning, you're like, I'm gonna have to go squish my Colorado beetles or whatever it is. Yes, your Japanese beetles. Yes. Okay, yeah. So as we go through the day, obviously keep these insects in mind And some of the practices we're going to be talking about are kind of contradictory. So you're like, okay, mulch can help, with elements like cucumber beetles, but they could also hurt if you're trying to really struggle with like a fungus and things like that. They could increase that disease's habitat. And so being aware of that and like really knowing what pest you're struggling with right now. Because also like I could also talk about grass as a whole, because grass is in the South something that it grows year round, and especially in the summertime. And I think I was talking to someone once in California, and they were like, oh, in the summer, our grass doesn't grow because, they have water differences and things like that. And I was like, oh, that makes growing in the summer so much easier if you only have to deal with insect pressure instead of like weed pressure as extreme as our summer, where it's like you're mowing your grass every week just to keep that space sanitary. So anyways, keep that in mind. We're going to go through a bunch of different practices. And again, I am a farmer. There's a lot of amazing experts at your cooperative extension that have, knowledge. We had one folk on here who's doing it on harlequin bugs. Yeah. Where it's like, they're talking about harlequin bugs, and, you get your expert that's just focused on that and nothing else. And so, keeping in mind that those folks exist, but I am just a farmer. And so this presentation is more so what I'm speaking to as a farmer, and hopefully to fellow farmers in the room as well. But if you're an expert, please help share. We got just a room of people looking for some answers. All right, so here we are at one of my favorite pyramids. It's much better than your nutrition pyramid that you get, grains, meat, dairy. It is the IPM pyramid. IPM being the ecosystem-based strategy. You're really focusing on creating an entire world where your plants are the winner in this ecosystem, because they're thriving, and really working with your ecosystem as well in order to make the best situations happen. So you're manipulating it, but also in a way that it's still not killing life and killing the world around it at the same time. So, and you're really using like scientific knowledge as well whenever you're talking about IPM. You're not talking about spraying every 2 weeks just because you're knowing when the right moments of insect pressure are. You're doing your research by scouting those insects and when that pressure gets too much for your crop. And one thing just like I like to throw out there is, the similarities between organic and traditional knowledge are climate smart. It's that the soil is really the main focus. IPM is the same thing. Again, soil is the focus of IPM, and really making healthy soil, because our plants, they know how to keep themselves healthy. They've been doing it for all of time and space. they were on this planet before humans were. And so they know how to protect themselves, but we've messed with the world a little bit, and we got to make that soil revitalized and healthy so that they can really thrive. And so that's an important moment to say that all of these titles and names of sustainable agriculture really are just talking about the soil and the health of that soil at the end of the day. So prevention, that first little piece of the pyramid, your foundation, things that happen so that that plant can have a strong, healthy life, which is so interesting. I just, talking about plants' immune systems is really super interesting to me. This is a diagram from Sayre's publication, Better Soil, Better Crops. And they really go a little bit further into the fact that these plants have these defense mechanisms to slow down animal, like insect pressure or fungal pressure. And so that therefore the plants can respond and, get some help. They call for help and stuff like that. So you got this one on the left, which is the systematically acquired resistance. This one is more common when it comes to like fungus and things like that. So one of the responses is salicylic acid, which you may have heard of like in some beauty concepts and stuff like that, because people will put it on their skin as well to help with the same kind of concept of kind of controlling and making a more positive biome on their skin. And so your plant will see these disease microorganisms attacking them and be like, all right, I'm gonna send this out to all of it and to all my plant leaves and things like that, and really try and protect it from this downy mildew or something like that. And then whenever you get into the right diagram, another plant's response is that induced systematic resistance. And so that one again, so cool. This one happens a little more often with insects attacking a plant, but it'll produce more ethylene and jasmonate. I think I said that right. And both of those like will ripen your plants really quickly in order to hurry up and make it to where your seeds will get spread faster. So that's a plant's natural like response. So if you've ever had like a insect pressure really attacking a plant, and you see that, you're like, man, my tomatoes are ripening way smaller, or maybe your like squash is producing much quicker. That's because these responses are happening and they are trying to get their seeds ready to spread for the next season, because they're like, oh, the pressure's too bad. You know, why don't I just sow my seeds and then try, and then next year, whenever those insects haven't come out of the ground yet, we will try again. Or like even maybe in a week or two, you know, we'll die off, and then, you know, we'll do a late succession naturally. And so that's all one of some of the ways that plants are just so smart in their immune systems. And then we'll get a little bit more into like how they work with the ecosystem as a whole. So the plants sometimes will create barriers in their cell walls to try and prevent like downy mildew from crossing over into other cells. They'll holler, you know, and call and create these release of hormones that'll attract like pests that are very specific to like your parasitoids, and you know, all that kind of fun aphid killing stuff like ladybugs. They'll attract that, and they'll try and just like slow down the consumption of their leaves as well. So they're really just working on all fronts at the same time. They're asking for help from other, you know, plants, from other insects. They're asking for help by like trying to protect their cell walls and things like that, as well as, you know, then creating these like immune system responses of salicylic acid and ripening in order to then make it to where they can survive to the next year, and their like species will continue. So I could nerd out about this for a long time, because I just think it's so interesting, just the plant systems. Are there any kind of questions on this so far? Okay, I see a question on third year farming, and now I need to start those flowers in the winter to get them out before the seeds go in the ground. So much to learn. Yes, timing. So we'll get to that next. And just like the timing of your plantings and things like that. But that's a great point. Like doing early plantings, getting them really early, or even doing a late planting sometimes also works. Ooh, roly-polies can also be a predator to stink bugs. Fascinating. Thanks, Rex. But so one of the notes on, again, you're going down the soil health elements, is that your insect and disease can change based upon what's happening in your soil. So high nitrogen, you know, over nitrodating your plants can often lead to your insects wanting to eat more of that green leafy foliage, because again, they're searching for that balance of carbon nitrogen in their body. So they are attracted to these plants that are going to be really high in nitrogen. And so if you're over fertilizing, you can oftentimes it can end up by attracting insects. Calcium and potassium, by changing those amounts, you can often change as well the amount of pressure that you're putting on your plants, and trying to change as well. Like I think there's certain ones like cotton and wheat. Some of those more, there's a lot more research, as always, done with agronomical crops that can really show the exact link between the amount of calcium in your soil and potassium and the amount of pressure you're going to get from disease. And then you're reducing your soil compaction, which, let's see, compaction decreases root disease. And then by your adding compost into your system as well, you're hopefully giving competition into these diseases and into these weed seeds even by having that. And then it's also shown that like compost, again, that same idea of compost giving competition helps decrease the amount of powdery mildew you're going to be seeing on your plants. That's like scientifically shown that using compost around your squash plants will significantly decrease the amount of powdery mildew. So if that's your main pest for your squash plants, you know, hopefully that'll help you in the long run. And then we get into some variety selections. Just again, things to take note of whenever you're deciding on what to plant. It is things like this, where you're looking at your seed catalog, you're super excited, you're deciding on what you want to plant. You're like, last year I had a lot of issues with root rot. And so this year I'm going to make sure to check that, as if they have something that can like is more resistant to it, then I will try and select that one. It gets a little, I know, like whenever I first saw these in seed catalogs, I was like, how did they make it to where, you know, it's got resistance to nematodes and tobacco mosaic virus and things like that? And it's from long lines of breeding at universities. So I live in Louisiana. LSU has a long history of genetic breeding for their seeds. We are really well known for our sweet potatoes in a lot of ways because of 80 years of them trying to select ones that are resistant to diseases. We've lost a lot of that, like programmatic elements have kind of decreased over the last couple of years. And so like now our rootstocks are more likely to be susceptible to new and upcoming diseases that weren't present in the 80s and things like that. So that's how they're finding these out. And you can even go even further, like back and be like, okay, here's an awesome graph I pulled from one of our ATTRA publications on cucumber beetles. And this is, again, scientifically shown that the sun bar of all the yellow squashes, the sun bar has the low, like is least attractive to cucumber beetles, you know, or like the table ace. And the table ace oftentimes is a really common suggestion for southern acorn squash selections because of this exact reason, because we have such issues with cucumber beetles. I mean, I know all over the world they have cucumber beetles, but the pressure is so high that, you know, we'll plant table ace as our acorn squashes. But yeah, so again, you're looking for these varieties and which ones are better, like what pressures you're going to best have to decide on. And it's not always going to be the one that's like, you know, the taste favorite, the AAS winner. It's going to sometimes be a one that's a little uglier and things like that, because those are not genetically modified for taste, or chosen, not modified, genetically chosen for taste. They were chosen because it's like, man, you know, that virus is this one's doing okay. All right, let's see what we can do with this. And for generations to come, that's the story. And then again, keeping that habitat alive, keeping it to where we've got these areas where not only you're feeding the ladybugs or praying mantises with once a year whenever you release them with a certain issue, but to where they have a habitat to live in and to thrive year round, where your milkweeds can be, you know, where all these insects can live year round, if that's the choice, the biological control you go with. So that's kind of a beginning of prevention for your plants. And it's very, again, very broad. You're dealing with soil health and maintaining those soil tests that you can do through your cooperative extension in order to better be able to add nutrients and, decrease the amount of pressure by creating competition. And we'll get even more into that because you can create competition not only through compost, but you can also create competition through inserting like certain types of plants. And so there's some really cool elements with that as well that we'll talk about a little later. All right, so our next little piece of the pyramid, cultural practices that you can use in order to better be able to stop these pests and the weeds and things like that. So the first being, just again, you're probably going to know all of these practices already, is just whether or not you've thought about their use as relevant to pest pressure. And so just reintroducing why good soil practices are also good pest pressures. So whenever we talk about crop rotation, we're talking about certain diseases. Like I know in my world, we had a bacterial disease that was causing wilt in all of our lettuce. And the real solution to try and get rid of it is to isolate that and only plant like monocots in that little acre for 5 years. And so that's one extreme level that that every disease attacks the same types of plants. And so being really mindful of what you're planting there if you have a history of planting. And also like 5 years can be a common amount for a disease. I'm looking at you, strawberries and alliums, they definitely are more, have longer term diseases sometimes. But crop rotation, you're giving those insects further to fly, right? Like you're changing the amount of coverage you have for your weed pressure. So like maybe at one time it's, radishes and you were sowing them really close together, and the next time it's tomatoes, which you were going to vine and things like that. So changing those elements, and in general, right, that's like a 3-year process. And to really try and break the cycle of that disease and host plant. But again, sometimes it can be more. And you can even see, I told you, I took quite a bit of this from like Rex and Martine and stuff. And so these photos are by Rex. So talking about sanitization as well. I love asking farmers when's the last time they sanitized their tools. Because oftentimes we'll sanitize our like harvesting tools, our bins or knives, maybe the truck of the bed where we're transporting things. But we'll sometimes forget about our like stirrup hose, our broad forks, the wheels that we use, like the wheelbarrows or the go-karts, whatever it is, those wheels are also carrying seeds and disease in between places. I remember one of the farms I got to visit in West Virginia was so like they're using such high sanitization levels that you would put on little booties, like little slipper booties, before you would enter their field. Because a lot of times it was farmers visiting them that were able to potentially bring weed seeds and disease little pieces and stuff into their fields. And so it was beautiful because of that, though, as well. Like that high level of sanitization was really keeping new pests from entering into their field, considering they had so many tours and things like that going on. Versus like, the villain, if it's purslane or if it's, dock, the villain, what to do with it, hopefully. And, keeping your washing areas really clean. And sanitization also includes, again, mowing the perimeters and mowing all the areas around your fields, as well as keeping those dead plant pieces out of that field and out of the walkway. That's a common thing to just throw the plant debris into the walkway, and while you're weeding and things like that. So like really being mindful of collecting those and bringing them out of your farm space. They're talking about trap cropping. And so this is a cotton field that has a strip of alfalfa as a crop in it. And talking about whether this lygus insect is really going to be able to hurt that crop in the long run, is going to be an important piece to play. Well, give me 1 second, y'all. I'm just gonna insert my battery. I wasn't prepared to run out of juice. There we go. So using alfalfa as a trap crop in between your cotton fields is really an amazing way to decrease your lygus insects pressure and things like that. And then, it can get overwhelmed and things like that. And so you're mowing, you're spraying that piece instead of spraying your actual cash crop. But it only works if the insects that you're trying to trap are like, they have low mobility, they have limited like ecological damage as a whole and things like that. So you really have to know which pests you're going for, but you might be looking at like blue Hubbard squash for vine borers, right? Like doing that as a trap crop. So a trap crop being something that you're planting far away from your cash crop that like will attract certain insects. Go ahead.
Audrey, if I could say something about this specific system,
Yeah.
you have to keep part of the alfalfa physiologically young in order to retain the lygus bugs, because once the alfalfa starts flowering and going to seed, then the cotton becomes more attractive. So that's why this farmer planted such, like six berms of alfalfa, because he mowed half of it, and you can see on the right there that it's coming up. It's physiologically young. That's very attractive to
Mm.
the lygus. And then on the left, he's going to mow that in another week or so. But also, alfalfa is a great habitat for beneficial insects, parasites, pollinators, and predators.
Thank you, Rex. Yay. It's so nice to have you on the call. I appreciate it. Um, yeah, so again, this is such a cool example in so many ways. And again, I live in Louisiana, where cotton is a large part of our agricultural ecosystem. And there's still a lot of spraying because it is such a heavily sprayed crop in general. And so we're continuing to find new ways to get around insect pressure there. And this is such a good example. I just wanted to mention a couple other classics like sunflowers and stink bugs. You can do a little row of sunflowers along the edge of your field, and then I've just chopped them down, and I remove them. I put them in closed containers and remove them from the space to try and attract those stink bugs. And your radishes help with flea beetles, and cherry tomatoes with your leaf-footed bugs. So all of those are good examples of insects that we have very commonly here in the South, and are really needing to find ways to attract them away. And pulling them, for those where it's more vegetable oriented, pulling them further away, like 8 to 12 feet, is going to be a lot more beneficial to you. But another cultural systems is how are you cultivating your fields? How are you trying to keep that weed pressure down? And you got a couple different cultivation systems that are right here. You know, you got your pre-plant tillage. Before you're planting, you're really trying to decrease the seed bed, potentially, you know, tilling and turning up certain diseases and seeds, exposing them to the sun, letting them germinate, and then, you know, cultivating that in order to try and decrease that seed bed. You know, I think you can get away without like a detailed tillage, you know, so you're getting away with very easily your top little couple inches in your soil, not deep tilling, because that could potentially, you know, unless you have a weed that is really deep, like dock or something, you know, you don't really need to do a deep till, and you just stay in the top a couple of inches and cultivate it. Blind cultivation, I don't know about y'all, so it was just really fascinating to me to hear about all these practices that are tractor or just cultivation based. Blind cultivation, so you already sowed your like seeds into the soil, but they haven't germinated yet, and that's the moment you're going to cultivate. So imagine the most common way to do this in my mind is like fire weeding your carrot bed based upon when your beets germinated, right? Like that's a blind cultivation. Row crop cultivation, like now the plants are growing and you're cultivating around it, and then inter-row cultivating between those rows. So, you know, and you can do these, of course, with tractors. You can do it by hand. You've got all kinds of systems to cultivate, but it's the cultural practices I'm more so referencing is, of course, when you're cultivating, making those decisions and plans based upon when that plant really needs the best chances, and getting rid of that seed bed. And of course, there's other practices to try and decrease your seed bed, but these are decisions you're making further along in order to, you know, get those seeds out of there before you even plant. Mulching is, of course, one of our favorites when we talk about weed suppression. It's the ones that gardeners use in their front yard. And there's so many different cool methods that you can do that with. You can do that with the plastics and fabrics that are very like sterile situations, but also really amazing, and different color of those plastic mulches have different benefits. I think if I'm remembering correctly, I think it's like the white mulch is shown to help decrease like the bacteria or like maybe the fungal pieces in the soil. You're talking about like straw hay here in the center, with a no-till system of rice, and, you know, trying to decrease our amount of like actual seeds coming up was a really important piece for us. And then also you have a mulch that is a living mulch, done by a really cool farmer up in Lincoln, PA. And so these are all amazing methods to try and suppress weeds. But again, this was the one I was talking about earlier, where it was like, well, it can also be a double-edged sword in some ways. Are you creating beneficial bacteria? Are you or not? Whereas at the same time, you can kind of like, by preventing that light, you might be able to actually decrease the amount of like insects that are able to come through. So that was one of the uses I've used for fabric mulches, is being like, okay, I know that these insects like to lay their eggs in the soil and then they'll come out. By only giving them a little bit of space near my plant, I can decrease the amount of places they lay their eggs. Of course, once they lay their eggs there, they're really close to the plant and there's no hope of them not finding it. But it gives, you know, you have to just decide on those battles as well. Cover crops, you know, you're decreasing your fungus and nematodes really easily with these cover crops, especially rye. Rye is just like chef's kiss of cover crops because it has a lot of ability to suppress weeds in your actual soil. And that's why so many folks right now are planting rye as their cover crop, and then like terminating or, you know, tilling it in and keeping that there throughout the year. this particular one, because again, we're in the South, so rye being planted in the deep South, our dates are off oftentimes of when we need them to be planted. You're really working on that like short cover crop period, which is really nice, but also you may not get the amount of biomass that you're hoping for. And so this person used sun hemp as their cover crop because we cover crop, they're cover cropping in July, August in the heat of the summer and using that as part of their cover cropping delay instead of like a winter cover crop and then killing and planting into it. So again, although rye is amazing, our planting dates for rye in our southern states are not as well researched and not as well utilized. And we're using a lot more, Sudan grass or sun hemp or cowpeas because of our droughts, because of the amount of biomass we want in this heated period instead of our cooler winter periods whenever certain grasses thrive that were more commonly used for cover crops. Biochemical pest suppression. Goodness, Audrey. Oh my goodness. So right here we're talking a little bit more into like the marigolds and a little bit more, we're getting higher in our actual pyramid, but at the same time, it's the ones that are more fun to talk about because they're still additions to our garden. So having these companion plantings like marigolds that are going to like release these horrible smells into your garden that'll just like keep all the bugs away. And the same thing with alliums, right? Like they're doing the same thing by, trying to spray these smells out there. That's their self-defense mechanism, right? They're trying to protect themselves. They're not trying to protect anything else around them. But guess what? We can use that to our advantage. And we will take them into our gardens and companion plant them close by to whatever insect we are trying to keep at bay. And so I've even done like allium strawberry plantings together and, just really trying to hone in on what planting dates are coinciding and what insect pressures I'm trying to decrease. There's a lot more details to this one. And so I don't want to go too long. So I'm trying to self-edit a little bit, but we have an amazing publication at ATTRA, and it's all about companion planting and resources. You can even make your own like biopesticides from marigolds or from alliums, from garlic, and really finding those ratios. And so that is one of our really cool resources. Ooh, I'm sorry, I didn't see your question, Mr. Thank you, Darren. Yeah. And so my experience with sun hemp as a cover crop in the summer, I really liked it. I had trouble terminating it because at the time I had raised beds. And so like my BCS, I had trouble like, using my BCS to really mow it down. And it got so thick that just crimping it wasn't doing the job. So we ended up having to crimp it and then tarp it in order to kill it. And the seeding rate, we were using someone's seeding rate, but it wasn't quite outgrowing all the grasses and things like that. So we did have to deal with, them being outcompeted in some spaces. But that could have just been user errors as far as like having a really good seeding rate system down, or like user errors if we were doing like fertilizer broadcasting versus if we would have done like a Jang seeder or earthway seeder. So, but for the large part, it was really awesome and gave us so much biomass to plant into. And, just like keeping that around. So if you want biomass in your soil, then it was a great option for summer. And it was less thick than Sudan, the sorghum Sudan cover crop that we have tried with as well, which again is amazing, but you have to like mow that down a couple times throughout the year, throughout your growing season, so that it doesn't get too big and too rambunctious of a cover crop. Versus rye, which is just so thin and light, it just dies. I don't know. Hopefully that helps. And then another system I like to think about is delayed planting. I am a big fan of fall crops instead of spring crops. So I do fall squashes, fall potatoes, and like things like that, or even just like planting them later in the summer instead of, I plant them early in the spring and then I just will like pick up all my squash at the beginning of June. Because at that point I just can't deal with the pest pressure and their habitat. I'm just removing your habitat. I tried my trap crops and I removed those already to keep you at bay, but I can't do it any longer. So I'll just pick them all up and then do a second planting for July. And by that time, there's no pests in the field. My cucumbers are doing amazing as long as I will water them as much as they want. So especially with squash, where like the heat of the temperature of the soil doesn't affect it as much. It worked really well for me. In tomatoes, as well, we were like, for those doing a late winter crop instead of a spring one, just like really playing with the concepts of planting as soon as you can and then having a succession later on for after those pests are out of the way. Because one of the ways, of course, is early planting to try and beat the insects. And then the one I don't think people think about as frequently is to delay planting for after the pressure has gone away, or doing fall crops in the South. I'm about to plant green beans for winter, and that's something that's really commonly planted here in the spring, but less so in the fall. So just playing with those planting dates, as well as your varieties and stuff. So, and then we get to physical, and I'm just going to breeze through these because I think y'all know these for a large part, and we're getting higher in that pyramid. So it's less about soil health and more about actual actions. This one, again, is going to take more labor. Each one of these, after the original one, they're taking more labor every time something happens, and more of your work and energy being put into your farm. So tilling and fire, again, we're going to go back to like tilling, helping minimize your weed pressure and things like that, as well as fire and using flame weeding in order to kill those weeds. I do love the fact that flame weeding doesn't actually just burn, but it like pops the water vessels in the plants. It's such a cool thing. And so really, exposing those insects whenever they don't want to be exposed, showing those weed seeds, and then coming back and killing them. You do both of these in the same way, whether it's fire or cultivation. Both of those, you're going to be letting those weed seeds like germinate and then destroying them. Germinate, destroying them, and then, that is a common misconception of like tilling, of like, oh, by tilling you're like trying to really control those weed seeds by letting them germinate. Because yes, you will till them up and like make those seeds germinate, but that's what you want, so that then they don't do that in the middle of your growing season. Flooding. So of course, like y'all have heard me say once or twice, I live in Louisiana. And one of the systems of weed control in Louisiana for rice is flooding. Like the rice survives and actually thrives, and it's more abundant if it's not in a flooded field. But controlling grass through rice season is really difficult. And so like your grass is going to continue to grow and can really damage your rice. And so that's the reason that we flood our fields, in order to better control those weeds. So, it can tolerate being flooded in the field. And then continue to grow. And yes, it's a decreased amount, but you're not having to spray chemicals. So technically flooding your fields creates a large amount. It's not a climate smart way to grow your rice, because you are producing other chemicals, but it keeps you from having to spray a pesticide or a pesticide on there. So anyways, it's like a balancing act always, and like properly flooding your fields at the right time, and then draining them and then flooding them. Anyways, it's just cool because that is a weed suppressant as well. Solarization, steam, all of these fun things. Steam, I feel like, is one of the new and upcoming kind of systems because it takes equipment like this, where you're trying to eradicate certain types of, just like you're heating up your soil to a high temperature. So similar things as solarization, where your life cannot survive in the same way. It'll go down and it'll repopulate once you're done with it. Again, on the southern note, it can be really hard here to use solarization in the same way. You really have to be really mindful about tightly tucking in the edges of your clear plastic. Otherwise, you'll just have a greenhouse effect in there, and the plants here are really used to the heat and humidity, and they will not die. They will just continue to exist. So like oftentimes I'll just like suppress them by tarping it, which doesn't kill them, but it just keeps them at bay until I'm ready to like plant and things like that. But yeah, that's the thing about sometimes about solarization in the South is unless you're really ready to really tuck those edges in tight, which oftentimes I am not ready to do, is like shovel and put all along the edge of my solarization tarps. I oftentimes just skip that unless it's like really necessary. So again, we're increasing the amount of labor into these effects. Row cover. So instead of using row cover, as just like a winter, we often see it as winter. They make ones that are more specific for insects, which are really nice. Here's really cool one where they're doing it on the side of their greenhouse. Of course, you're decreasing airflow at that point, which can bring its own issues. But the way we see it here on the right, where they're putting it over their greens infield, similarly to how they do their frost cloth, has worked really well for me. Yes, it changes the amount of airflow a little bit, but also especially in your winter time, insects are really nice. So they're growing, I think, like broccoli under there, something along those lines, or collards. And so they're keeping their beetles at bay so that they can have just like really beautiful greens to sell to restaurants. Pheromone traps, again, a lot of money you're getting into potentially, but again, you're getting specific. I don't really like just sticky traps or anything, like something that's just going to kill every beneficial and every non-beneficial insect out there. And so pheromone traps are really trying to hone in on specific insect issues. And they can help you figure out whether or not you've reached like the threshold of crop damage or not. Because again, we're trying to weigh whether or not, will I still have enough tomatoes this summer to sell where financially it's not a loss, or is the amount of tobacco hornworms an issue here enough to that point. So you're always weighing that, and you can see on some of these pheromone traps that you're creating certain like scales of whether or not how many do you see over this amount of time. That means you're at the critical point where you need to start putting more money and more time into this crop. So just a good gauge as well. Biological control. Thanks, Fred, for coming. Biological control is, again, really cool and a lot more of what we think about when we think of IPM. For some reason, it is the one that's talked about the most when it comes to IPM. I don't know if it's because all these other ones are difficult to understand if you're not a farmer, but it is a more commonly said one. So predators, you're talking about your soldier bugs, your pirate bugs, ladybugs, and lacewings are some of the more common ones. These are generalists. They eat all kinds of insects, which means that they can starve, like they won't starve as easily, or they're very specific and they will starve, so like for predator insects, they are alive and they can oftentimes also be killed by all these insects. So a pirate bug will eat a ladybug as quickly as it will eat the insects, your pest issues. So just kind of a point there. Parasitoids. So this is really interesting. I put it on here just thinking, again, that we are going to try and be talking about insects that are more generalists. So they're specialized in their choices of hosts. They're smaller than the host. The females search for hosts. You're thinking of those wasps that are laying eggs in certain insects, and then they're going to burst out at certain moments. And then they'll eat that host and go on their way, which is what's happening right here to this worm, is that they got a bunch of eggs on them, and they're about to pop, and that insect will be eaten. So it's longer term, right? You're talking about not an immediate response, but a little bit of a delayed response. If you're releasing adult parasitoids, that means that you have to have a food source for them, because they don't eat these insects, right? Like they're herbivores. They're eating certain types of flowers or pollens, plants. So making sure you have food sources for them if you're releasing them into your farm as well, and that you can maintain them even whenever this insect is not present. Nematodes, it is something that is really cool if you're trying to decrease like certain soil-borne insects, like insects that are being laid in the soil. You're talking about soil-borne fungus and bacteria. All of these things, oftentimes there is nematodes that are able to kind of replace this and fight against it. Again, you're creating competition in this atmosphere. You're really laying into the natural systems of the ecosystem. So you can see in this photo on the left there, the nematode is breaking in to the actual like plant matter of the insect or of the fungus. It's just breaking into it by slow, steady living beings. And here it is on the right where the nematode is, being bursting out of an insect who it had infected. So again, just really amazing things that we don't see. Like it's always so easy to see your little ladybugs, but then you go into these nematodes and you're like, what is this in my soil that is helping me and creating the right environment? So you can buy nematodes and add those to your soil to help fight, cucumber beetles or blights and things like that. Again, more expensive. And then these final little pieces about biopesticides. So in organics, right, we don't spray synthetics. We only spray biopesticides, which means things that occur naturally in nature that have been able to be rendered into sprays and things like that. For this one, we're talking about BT. So Bacillus subtilis controls battery mildew. You may have heard of BT because now they've even genetically modified corn to have like this BT chain in it, and things like that, where they're doing things with it that were not organic, right? But as a whole, it does exist in nature on its own and can be used, therefore, in organic systems. So if you're just using BT and adding this to your garden, that is an organic option. It really just like stops the feeding of those insects on the plant for a large part. So you can kill it outright whenever it's young, and while some strains of BT bacteria will stop an insect pest from feeding, they can just trigger like the plant's defenses as well. And then last but not least, you're talking about botanical pesticides, which the most famous one being neem, which has some amazing elements, 99 insecticidal phytochemicals. That number is outrageous to me. Like just the amount of amazingness that neem does whenever you have it at the right moment in the right time. It comes from this tree, the neem tree, and we have just really, I think, in organics, I don't know where we would be without these two examples of botanical pesticides and biopesticides. There's a lot of other ones out there, and you can find more on the website that I posted right at the start of the talk. And then as far as resources go, again, you're looking at who can help me figure out identify what my pests are. We're always here for you at ATTRA. We have a hotline, and we also have a chat on our website. And then we have our fellow farmers, because that's oftentimes who we're going to whenever we have insect issues. We have our pest management resources. If you're trying to figure out what your IPM plan is it to release insects at this time of year? Is it when am I tilling or cultivating? When am I adding my nitrogen according to what my soil tests tell me to do? Your extension offices have people that can test what your plant matter is. So like if you have a disease and you don't know what it is, they can take a little example of your plant and tell you what disease is eating you up. Southern Regional Integrated Pest Management Center for the USDA is working with a lot of regional extension offices as well, but they have their own resources in their own right. And then E-Organic and E-Extension. E-Extension was a cooperative nationally between extension offices. And from that, E-Organic came about, which is, again, with more resources for you to be able to explore and look into about pest management and this cooperative of information. So this is the page that I was showing you, that I was talking about earlier, that we have on our ATTRA website about what to spray and how much. And you can put in your pest pressure or like what kind of active ingredient you're looking for, and it can help you figure out how much to spray and when, and what the actual sprays you're looking for are best for. So a really cool resource. And then just here's some of the references I pulled from today, and that is it. All right. What kind of questions? Are there any questions for us? Ooh, okay. I see Rex says, need to create flowering habitat, nectar and pollen on your farm for parasite predators and pollinators. Yes, thank you. Needing those habitats and plant life, really important to continue to maintain the insects' life and habitat. The recipe for marigolds as a pesticide, that can be found on the link right above you that Darren shared for the ATTRA publication on planting resources. Ooh, field mice. I know for my farm, because I don't have a lot of fresh produce, pop them on the head. Like, I'm okay with sometimes having an animal in my field for food safety, but not always. Owl houses, again, it's a weird thing with food safety whenever you start getting into introducing more animals into your field. But mice are tricky, so there's been like, you can try and do noise or try and trick them into different like levels that there is a cat and things like that. But molasses, I do really like molasses, but you're getting again into like the potassium levels that you're adding to the soil. So I have created some of the most beautiful bok choy of my life whenever everything else was being eaten, because I was spraying it with molasses. But also at the same time, like, there's not a lot of research that molasses individually is helping it. So it's still something that hopefully will one day be researched and shown to help. For now, we know that you're adding a certain like potassium into your soil. So if you're short in potassium, it's a great one to add. And they have some great sources of organic, or you can literally go and get organic molasses from your grocery store and dilute it, which is an important piece, because otherwise you'll attract all these other insects and ruin your spray bottle a little bit, because it's hard to go in between molasses and something else because it just smells so sweet. Yes. Rex says, adding bat boxes to help with insects, owls for gophers and voles, and then root rot nematodes. For root knot, I don't have a ton of experience with root knot, other than like giving the soil a break whenever it would happen to my like greenhouse area. And so I was lucky that at that moment where I could move my greenhouse, it wasn't tied down for hurricane season. Does anyone else have the suggestion, want to come off mute for root knot nematodes?
Audrey, I just excuse me, this is Rex, and you have to rotate away from a root knot nematode susceptible crop, which is not always that easy. But there was a walnut grower out here that was planting bell beans as an alley crop, as an alley cover crop, which is a great thing to do. He is organic, and that's the right thing to do. But the bell beans were hosts to root knot nematodes, which were getting onto his walnuts. So we had a person come in and suggest, oh, change over to mustards because they don't host generally root knot nematodes. So even your cover crops, you need to rotate. But for root knot nematodes, you gotta have a really good crop rotation to rotate away from and decrease their populations in the soil.
Thank you, Rex. Yeah. I really appreciate you coming off mute to help. Yeah, hopefully that helps. Googling just what are susceptible plants to your root knot and seeing if any of those can be worked further into your rotation of crops. Because again, it's a struggle if you don't have a lot of land sometimes whenever you get a disease. And making sure, of course, whenever you get these, that you're sanitizing in between uses, in between fields and things like that. If you need shovels that have red duct tape on them, because that's one's going to be only for that piece of your land where you see the root knot, so you don't spread it to the rest of it. There's some systems like that. If that's easier for you than like sanitizing in between uses, having two sets and just building a little shelter near that space, a little 2x4 and a little roof to protect your shovels. And then I dropped one of the links to some of our resources on ATTRA's website right there. Really amazing resources, y'all, that we have. A lot of this information, again, came from some of the amazing folks I get to work with every day. Hopefully I did their knowledge justice. But there's a lot more out there and a lot of amazing research that is happening when it comes to pests. And in the South, just like as a closing point, like in the South, we are primed to be the future of agriculture in the United States because our amount of rain, because we can grow year round. We are so ready to take on that mantle. And when it comes to sustainable agriculture and organic agriculture, our biggest issues maintain to be our pests, continue to be the fact that we have grass in the summer and that our insects love it here. And, all our diseases are just thriving in that same rain that makes us so ready to be the future of agriculture. And so that's just like, on one of the notes of like why this is such an important issue to me, is why Southern Organic Pest Management is such an important issue, is because it is preventing our food systems here sometimes from achieving all they could do. And so as we continue to learn, as our research continues to grow better, not just our agronomical crops, but our specialty crops that really feed so much of our world around us, then we can only continue to be able to better manage these pests, even with a growing and changing climate. So thank you all so much for your time today. I know y'all are busy. But if y'all have any questions, you can find us at the ATTRA website. You can email me if you have any follow-up questions as well. I'm going to drop my email in the box. Yes, and special shout out for Rex and Darren for helping out with the questions. Again, some of the knowledgeable staff I get to work with every day. Thank you all so much.